Youth voters today are criticized for not being politically active. YouTubers and meme sharers are called slacktivists for not actually getting out and being activists. But what exactly is activism? Activism refers to making change in any range from a community to the entire world, and usually on a political scale. But how does one do this? Activism is a confusing term that everyone can spot what it isn't, but many can't pin down on what it actually is. Thanks to the Schoolhouse Rock video, we all know how a bill becomes a law, but the government side of things is only a fraction of what is required to make massive change. The bill to be requires people to create a web of networks of communication between politicians, donors, and people of influence. Money is required to spread information to convince the voting public why their issue is important to the average person, so they can add that to their calculus as to which way they feel like voting. Every movement has required this method, from abolitionism to the right to vote for women to civil rights to marriage equality. These required a large mass of people being allied with a large organized effort who went after donors and lobbied politicians and spread media to make their argument to the public. It needs to be able to pay people to work full-time on the cause, as well as people donating a significant amount of their time toward the cause. Causes take many years to turn into laws. Abolitionism took from before 1776 to the 1850s and a war. Women's suffrage took from before the 1850s to 1920. The civil rights movement took from the 1860s to the 1960s to see much headway. The marriage equality movement took from 1969 to the present, nearly the same amount of time as normal with the legalization of marijuana. Each one of these succeeded following 4 strategies: education, networking, organizing, and fundraising. Let's look at each of these. Education. At the beginning of a movement, hammering out your core message is very important and requires many attempts to craft it so that the average person can understand it with enough nuance, and you can counter the claims of your opponents just enough without overwhelming the listener with facts that will cause their minds to shut off. You have to repeat the message over and over in different ways and attempts without making it feel like you're shoving it down people's throats or using too many guilt trips. That can turn people off and drive them away even worse. Big events like rallies, stunts, or the Occupy movement help in educating and gaining political media coverage, but then the next step is required: networking. This step involves not only contacting and keeping in touch with fellow believers in your cause, it involves contacting people with power and influence and convincing them of your position. People with political and financial power. People with political power can give their votes if they feel like their voters will be for it, and it will give them more votes. Many people with financial power these days have better access to people in Congress, and they can donate. A Kickstarter usually is not enough. Just going after little fish in this post-Citizens United world doesn't work. One has to go after the big fish. Organize. You now have to set up a full-time 501c3 or 4 and have full-time staff who are solely focused on this to lobby, advertise, raise funds, and rally the base to get out votes. They also need to be good at directing volunteers to feel like they're involved. The more power the group has to get out votes, the more likely a politician will listen to them. And lastly, fundraising. Now that there is a full-time organization, getting more money to maintain the organization, networking, and education is very important. This then builds scaffolds on top of scaffolds until the presence is big enough, and often generational opinion changes to force the issue into law. But don't think that once you've passed enough legislation you can stop and disband the organization. There are always people on the other side of the argument that will try and claw back the issue and reverse it, especially if it is important to people with monetary or emotional stakes. The system of changing the law sounds absolutely counterintuitive and sucking up to the man and rich people. In this hyper-individualistic society, it feels like selling out in conformity. This is especially true for groups with very different ideologies working together on one issue they both agree on in this super partisan world. The youthful punk and anarchistic ideas of burn it all down, it's too broken to be fixed has never worked in this country. Only complex, organized, long-term patience has changed things for the better. Joining already existing groups such as causes or even political parties have the advantage of established networks and fundraising channels, So even if you disagree with some of their operations or views, they may be better than nothing, and you may be able to change the group from the inside for the better. However, if you disagree with all the current cause groups out there, be prepared to have to start all of your activism methods from scratch. So what is activism? It is often a multi-generational web of people working very hard together, often in a difficult, thankless series of tiny victories over possibly a period of decades. So slow it feels like most movements in activism really do absolutely nothing, but it is truly the only way any change in the world has ever been accomplished. It is also the way the Constitution has set it up, to make change in a nation very slowly. This system may be terribly inefficient or unfair, and there may be better systems to ensure fair democracy and engagement, but if you don't understand how the current system works, you won't have even the first idea as to how to change it for the better now.